Hi, my name is Cody David, and I'm going to talk about how underqualified coaches are a problem. So, I want to start off with a little exercise. I want you all to think about a terrible coach that you've had. And unfortunately, most people can recall, oh, I remember this coach, he abused me, he always yelled at me, he made us run way too much, it was horrible. And unfortunately, bad coaches are common because they are underqualified. So what we're going to cover in this presentation is what is the problem, which is underqualified coaching, and why is it important? The second aspect we're going to cover is why are most coaches underqualified? And then we're going to talk about how we can fix this, how we can make change. So first of all, the problem. Poor coaching can actually physically, mentally, and socially hurt young athletes. Physically, they can be detrimental through poor coaching techniques, such as saying, all right, you guys didn't do too good this game, I'm going to have you run 4 miles. The mentality is negative reinforcement, which can actually have very detrimental effects in the body. Or a poor coaching technique by saying, I'm going to have this youth athlete have a heavy load on their spine with a barbell back squat. When done incorrectly, that can create compression in the spine, which leads to lower back issues. That's one of the hundreds and thousands of ways that poor technique can affect. Mentally, a lot of kids, a lot of people really respond differently to different types of stimuli. For example, some people need to be, I need you to yell at me, I need to get really into it, you're going to help me out by yelling at me. If some people say, no, yelling actually kind of scares me, I don't want to be yelled at to work. If a coach only thinks that, okay, yelling works, that this person's going to work for everybody, then kids can have an almost traumatic experience with these coaches. And then socially, it affects them that it's very common that an athlete has a bad experience with a coach and they drop out of their sport. And at that young age, when you drop out of your sport, you lose those connections to friends, the people that you played with, and it's hard to maintain those connections as a youth. And this is not fair. And the reason I say this is because unless you're at a very high income community and you say, I want this ex professional to come train my kid one on one, the majority of us don't have that luxury. And even if you are from a high income and you just want to play for your high school, you can't choose who your coach is. And if the majority of them are unqualified and untrained, then it's really up to luck to whether you're going to get a good coach or a bad coach. And according to the National Council for the Accreditation of Coaching Education, they released studies that tell us that less than 5% of youth sport coaches have received any relevant training. When it comes to interscholastic coaching, which means coaching at the high school level, that number increases only to an estimated 25 to 30%. That means that 70 to 75% of all coaches don't know what they're doing, and they are being expected to handle the new generation, the youth of America, and make sure that they have a good time. So this began with a recognition of the issue, but there's poor follow through. So there is the California State Legislature, which released a document titled Article 4.5, where it mentions that a lot of coaches need to be educated on how to train kids, how to have a mental philosophy, how to properly develop them, and they wrote this article saying we need to help kids. However, they released no education, and that's why I have an X to the arrow that they released nothing for these coaches. Now, our area of focus is going to be Southern California, specifically the Irvine Unified School District, and they also recognize that, hey, coaches need education because they're dealing with young kids. And so what they did was they released a little bit of education. I think it was 2 courses. However, they did not make them required. And after an interview with the head football coach within the IOSD school district, he mentioned that he has never even heard of these courses. Now, from the highest level of coaching, and they're not knowing about these courses, meaning that this education is not getting to anybody. So a big issue that comes from poor coaching is that it leads to a higher rate of sports dropout. A 2004 report from the University of Maine found that youth athletes who play for an untrained coach drop out at a rate of 26% per year. That means nearly a quarter, almost over a quarter of athletes are dropping out of their sport, and they're facing a multitude of detrimental effects because of it, just because of an untrained coach. Two of the biggest things that happen with untrained coaches and what happens when you drop out is one, as we mentioned before, you can't maintain those connections as a youth and you lose friends. Another thing is that you lose life skills. So the diagram that I put right here says last place. There's something about getting last place and learning to pick yourself up from that competition and get all the way back up to first. That's going to be a trait you're going to use throughout your entire life. This and many other life skills you learn in sports, these kids are being denied to because of an untrained, unqualified coach who made it a terrible time for them. So historically, this was caused by coaches coach as they were coached. And what I mean by that is illustrated in this diagram here. So if we start out right here with a older coach, as you see in the one in purple, he has 3 teammates, let's just say. His style of coaching was so that it helped 2 of his athletes, which indicates the check marks. One of them, the one in the center, he ended up becoming a coach because he was really inspired by this great coach that he had. And so what happens is that he thought, okay, so this coach, when he was coaching me, he yelled at me a lot. He's really in my face, and it really pushed me to do better. So when he became a coach, he started yelling at his athletes and pushing them to their limit because that made him feel better, so it should help everybody else. Wrong. In this example here, all of these athletes, these 4 athletes, they didn't respond well to people yelling at them, and they're going to have a bad experience because the coach thought, well, if it worked for me, it's going to work for everybody. That's not the case. Everybody is different, and things change over time. Unfortunately, coaching is not cut up to that. So the first cause that comes to underqualified coaching and inequality for all athletes is the extremely large need for coaches. So there are over 7.6 million high school athletes in the United States. There are over 200,000 sport coaches. That means that one coach is responsible for a whole variety of athletes. And so schools and organizations are saying, oh, I need a coach here, I need a coach here. They always need a coach. So they don't put any qualifications, and they just say, anybody who wants to coach, go ahead. After a brief interview with the ex-alumni of the IUSD school district, he mentioned that he was given a job, actually, to become a coach right after he graduated. He had no experience, no qualifications, no education for coaching, but he was still offered the job, and that was just because the coach needed help. And the reason that the coach needs so much help is because there's so many kids. Now, another issue, the second cause, is that there's not enough money for all these coaches. When people go to get their doctorate's degree, they go because they know there's a lot of money in it, because they trained at schooling to deserve this kind of money. When it comes to coaching, there are so many positions that need to be filled that there isn't enough money to pay all these coaches. And therefore, there's no incentive for them to really improve themselves because anybody can get a job as a coach. This has led to minimal qualification requirements because everyone needs a coach, and the schools and employers, they don't have to pay them that much. So the only qualifications to become a coach or a high-level high school coach was mentioned in the IUSD handbook was that 1, you needed 2 years of coaching experience, and 2, you needed a valid California credential authorizing service and grade levels. So the issue with that is that 2 years of coaching experience doesn't mean that you were a good coach, doesn't mean that you knew what you were doing, it just means that you sat on a field with the whistle for 2 years. And that qualifies you to be a coach? I don't think so. The second thing is a valid California credential. This is almost basically a teaching credential. And the classroom setting is way different than the field setting. And there are so many different challenges that are gonna arise as a coach that teachers don't have to face, and vice versa. So a teaching credential, is it a step in the right direction? Sure. Is it gonna help you really bring out the best in these kids and make sure that they're having a safe and good time? No, it's not. And the fourth cause is that there's little consideration for sport-specific training within the 3 areas of coaching. So the 3 main areas of coaching are technique, mental development, and strength training. Now the reason I said sport-specific is because every single sport is different. If you tried to strength train a cheerleader and strength train a football player, it's not going to work out for them, and someone's going to have to give and take. Same thing with mental development. If you told a cheerleader, you say that I want you to act like a football player, I want you to be angry, I want you to hit hard. They're not going to know what to do because that's not what their sport is. Their sport is to make people happy. And that's why every coach needs to know sport specific and be trained to their sport. So as far as it comes to technique, coaches need to know how to properly progress and regress athletes and have them equipped to become successful in athletic performance. Mental development, they need to teach them both strategies and also how to tackle any type of problem that would arise within their sport. And then strength training, you make a football player big and strong, you make a cheerleader more agile, more flexible, because that's what their different sports requires, and coaches need to know that. And the fifth cause of this is that there's little to no efforts made to educate coaches by employers. So we already know about IUSD. There's also the California Interscholastic Federation, which oversees the southern section of coaching and of all sports. And they have also released a document saying we need to educate coaches. Nothing happened. So here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to fix this. First, we're going to create and implement. So the first part, creation, is we're going to create a national certification, which is going to talk the 3 areas of coaching. It's all going to be sport specific. So there's going to be a football one, there's going to be a soccer one, there's going to be a track one, there's going to be all the sports. And then also, we're going to teach them how to handle multiple athletes. Now, the reason why that one's important is because very rarely are coaches going to coach one-on-one. Most high school coaches have to deal with 50, 60, even 100 kids. And if they know how to handle big groups and properly progress and regress them, that's going to be very valuable. Second part, for this to work and this to truly fix the issue, is proper implementation. So what we're going to do is we're going to have all sports organizations and all high schools require this national certification. So what we're going to do is this is going to fix the causes and fix the problem. So the first cause that we mentioned was that there's an extremely large need for coaching. So when you qualify coaches to handle larger groups, it lowers the need. Think about it. If one coach is taught to handle 100 athletes, that means that there's going to need less positions there's going to be less positions open because more athletes can be taken care of by one coach. Therefore, if an underqualified coach tries to apply, then he can say, oh yeah, I'm very only comfortable with 2 to 3 athletes. Well, then he's going to be beat out by the qualified coach because what these schools need, these organizations need, is they need volume. The next qualification is that it's going to allow them to get more money. An issue we talked about is that there's not enough money for all the coaches. Well, if there's less jobs and these coaches are deserving of more money due to their qualifications, they spent time to get this qualification, as a doctor spends time in medical school. So therefore, even though those are not the exact same thing, the more time you spend getting qualified and trained, then that means more money, and the schools also have less positions to fill, so they can give out more money to each of those individual positions. The third issue that we mentioned was how most coaching positions require minimal qualifications. Well, with our national certification, it forces coaches to seek qualifications. It's going to teach them their sport specific. It's going to teach them the 3 areas of coaching. And this also plays into the implementation part where each of the coaches are going to have to, organizations and high school, they're saying, you're not going to be able to get a job unless you have the certification. That's the only way to force them to take it. If this is not being forced to seek qualifications, no one's going to do it. There needs to be an incentive program. The fourth issue is that there was little consideration for sport-specific training, the 3 areas of coaching, and this is going to certify them to be trained in those areas. That means if someone wants to be a high school coach, did you take the high school section of it? Did you take the high school section of cheerleading? Did you take the high school section of soccer training? Because each of these individual sports have individual needs, and they need to be addressed and they need to be taught before they deal with America's next generation. And the last section is that there was little to no efforts made to educate coaches by employers. So IOSD, even though they made little efforts such as providing this type of education, as we have the check mark for this education, they weren't providing it to all their coaches, and they weren't pushing it. They weren't requiring it. So by providing this national certification and talking to them and saying you need to require this, it's going to give the employers an easy way to educate their coaches. Also, a common thing that happens is that when people move up in coaching, they also say, oh, I don't like this sport too much. I would like to transfer different sports. Instead of having to lose their job, start all over again, their employer can provide this education, keep coaches, and provide different aspects of it and say, okay, you already know mental development. We can talk about mental development for the cheerleader, even though you're a football coach. And then this allows for more productivity and more growth for employee growth rather than having them just be stagnant in their job or wanting to move on eventually. So this is the material works cited where we talked about the different source. This is the images works cited. And here's the handout that I provided to you guys in the link below. Thank you all so much for listening.